Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are out of the bye week. We are into the second half of the season. Basically, everybody is halfway through their schedules, and things are going to get real for everybody from this point forward. Some teams have already played a couple of district games, but everybody from this point out is in district play, and then we get to focus on who's in the playoffs, who's out of the playoffs, who's fighting for the playoffs over the final 5 weeks of the season. It's crazy to think about it, that we're in week 7. We're getting ready for week 7 of the football season, and we're going to talk about the few teams that did play last week, and then we'll look ahead to what's going to happen this coming Friday night. We'll do it like we always do. We'll start from the top. We'll work our way down. Everybody's playing this week except for Texoma Christian, so we'll talk about their game at the end, and we will start, as we always do, with the Sherman Bearcats in their 6-5A Division I matchup as they host Frisco Heritage on Friday night. This is a 7 o'clock start. If I don't mention the time, as you guys well know, it's 7:30 on Friday would be the kickoff. But we do mention if they play on different days or if they have different times. And Sherman's district is always 7 o'clock starts, and this is at Bearcat Stadium. Sherman comes in at 2-3 and 1-2 after losing last week 30-7 against Frisco. And Frisco Heritage comes in at 5-1 and 3-1 in district play after it won 46-14 against Frisco Lebanon Trail. So we'll recap what Sherman did last week. Like we said, losing that game 30-7, and you might see that score and say not a very close game, and I would say no, it was a relatively close game for a while. Sherman had a 7-6 lead after the first quarter. They were only down 16-7 at halftime, and it was 23-7 going to the fourth quarter before Frisco scored their final touchdown to widen the gap. But it was close, through 2.5 quarters because Frisco didn't score until there was about 4 minutes to go in the third quarter. So it sat at 16-7 for much of that third quarter, and this was a defensive battle. Sherman finishes with more yardage as it held the Raccoons to not even 200 yards. But Frisco makes a big play on defense with a 63-yard interception return for a touchdown in the middle of the second quarter that turned a 9-7 lead into the 16-7 lead at halftime. So obviously that was a big huge play. Sherman got stopped on downs twice on fourth and short to turn the ball over on downs in Frisco territory. Both teams had a turnover. Sherman recovered a fumble when Frisco was trying to drive and get a score right before the halftime. So defense was the name of the game for a huge portion of this game. Colby Ray Short had 5 catches for 52 yards and the touchdown for Sherman. Kane Bowen 19 carries for 75 yards. Micah Hunt 5 catches for 50 yards. Trevor Pugh 5 catches for 45 yards. And we talked about last week going on the road to play the first place team, one of the 2 undefeated teams left in the district. And like we said, for 2.5 quarters, Sherman was right there. But unfortunately they came up short. And so when you look at the standings going into this game, Sherman is tied for 5th place. They were in 5th place before last week's games, and they're sitting tied for 5th place with Frisco Wakeland. Frisco still in first place at 4-0. Lone Star right behind at 3-0. They're a game off because they've already had the bye. And then Frisco Reedy and then Heritage are both tied for 3rd place at 3-1. So another big game for Sherman this week to try to stay in the race. They still have to play Wakeland, who they're tied with. They still have to play Reedy and Lone Star, who is in front of them. So they still control their destiny. But they got to win, and they got to get some wins going starting this week just to stay in that race. Frisco Heritage, like we said, they're 5-1. The lone loss is to Lone Star to open district play. They've won their last 3 games. It just so happens that they've played the 3 wins that Frisco Heritage has are against the bottom 3 teams in the standings, Centennial, Lebanon Trail, and Liberty. And this was a game last year between the two. That was another one of those close defensive battles that Heritage was able to pull out 13-6. So again, you have a game against an opponent that Sherman knows it can compete with. It competed with them last year. They just weren't able to find a way to muster up the little bit of offense that they needed to win that game. So it's not a must win, but it's a pretty close to it if you want to stay in the race. You've still got plenty of games left, and you're playing the teams around you. But you don't want to need help in a lot of cases. And again, we start talking about tiebreakers. I know it's early in district play, and we'll talk about that with some of the other teams coming up that we preview for this week, because they're going to be involved in some of those games too. But you don't, if it comes down to a tiebreaker, and this district had a 3-way tiebreaker for 3rd place last year. 3 teams were tied. Somebody got left out because of point differential and wins and losses and all that other stuff. You want to be able to say, okay, at least if something crazy happens, we have the tiebreaker over Heritage, or we have the tiebreaker over, whatever other team. So it's good that it's at home. I think even though you're coming off a loss, I think there were some good things that you could see, in that loss. I thought the defense played, really well. I got to go cover that game because it was on the Thursday night, and I'm not to take anything away from Frisco because obviously they're 4-0 in district, but they were able to Sherman was able to hang with them for a really long time, and I think that's a good sign as we play some of these games going forward to stay in the race down the stretch. So. And this is a team too with Frisco Heritage. Last year was only the second time that they have had a winning record since the program started about 12 years ago. So a lot of this is new for that program to be in these positions. Obviously, if they win one more game, they're going to have another winning record. And so I don't know if you say it's good for them, because they've got confidence that they're having success, but they've got pressure now too. I mean, I'm sure their coaches they're talking about the standings and saying, hey, this is a team below us. We have to beat them. We don't want to have it come down to a tiebreaker and they have the tiebreaker over us. So this is a big game for them too. If they want to make the playoffs again. For about when the dust settles at the end of the district. So that's an interesting game. As Sherman hosts Frisco Heritage at 7:00 at Bearcat Stadium on Friday night. We talk about teams needing tiebreakers and having it come down to that. We talk about the Denison Yellow Jackets, who are hosting Terrell in 7-5A Division II action on Friday night at Munson Stadium. Both teams did not play last week. That whole district took the bye. We talked about that. How that district agreed, hey, we're going to play 2 games. Everyone's going to play the first 2 games of district. We'll have a bye in the actual middle of the full season. We'll play 5 games, have a bye, play the last 5 games. So it's like the olden days when that's the way the schedules were made. So everybody has the same amount of rest. We don't have to worry about, playing almost 2 months straight and then going into the playoffs. And everybody's kind of beat up and tired. So Denison's 3-2 and 1-1 in district play. Terrell is 3-2 and 0-2 in district play. The thing to note about that is they have played Melissa and Lovejoy. Those are the 2 losses. And last year, Terrell did the same thing. They lost obviously to the top 2 teams. And then in the final stretch, they only lost once against Crandall, and they finished 4th to get the last playoff spot. Denison ended up 5th in the standings. And this was the game that decided 4th and 5th place, essentially, because Denison finished a game behind. And if you flip Terrell's win by a 55-30 score last year, if Denison had won that game, they would have been 4th, and Terrell would have been 5th, and Denison would have gone to the playoffs. So obviously this is a huge game. We talk about it in the second year of realignment schedule. you know the path that you have to take. You know the games that you have to win that you didn't win, or keep winning, or the games that you won last year to maintain your pace. This is one of those key flip games where everybody's going to look at the score to see who wins it, because it's going to go a long way towards a playoff spot. Just based on what happened last year, it won't have changed the trajectory of the way things went last year. Denison's at home. I think the bye week came at a good time for them. Obviously coming off the loss to Lovejoy, 47-7, the last time that they played. The big talking point was, last year we kind of let that carry over. We got beat pretty badly in that game, and even though we had the bye, we let it carry over into when we restarted against Terrell. And then you have Melissa, and then you have Princeton and Crandall and Poteet to finish. And Denison last year lost after the Lovejoy game. They lost 3 of the next 4 games to end up finishing 5th. And I think that was a conscious thing this time around about not letting that game carry over into this matchup. Taylor runs the ball a lot. They run wing T. I thought Denison did a really good job against Kennedale for the half that we saw, and that's the reason that game is on the schedule, because of facing Terrell. I think it's a good week for them to focus on that. Like I said, they have the extra time to work on it. They have the tape and the experience from the Kennedale game, even though it was a half before the weather hit. They did really well for about 80% of that half, and it was a really good start. And I think this will help with some injuries. Of course, we won't know till you get out there and see. But I think it's a good setup for Denison with Terrell coming here. But again, this is a Terrell team. They've got some key pieces back. The big name to watch is Chase Bingman. He's I won't say probably. He's the best running back in the district. He's gonna get a bunch of carries. And can you stop him? And last year, Denison could not only stop him, but his cohorts in the backfield. And the game got away from them, even though they scored 30 points. They were never really in it. Terrell always had a couple touchdown lead. And so obviously the eyes are on the defense. We've talked about, it seems like, they've been better this year. And this is one of those ones where you're going to look and say, how much better did you get from last year? Because this was one of those swing games. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. And like we said, if it comes down to a tiebreaker, the winner of this game could end up in the mix. It's very early in this district, but obviously Melissa and Lovejoy are off to 2-0 starts. They don't meet till the end of the season. So odds are, everybody's expecting them to beat everybody else, go into that matchup undefeated. They are, Melissa's number 1 in the state in the rankings. Lovejoy is number 9. So it would take, a huge upset from some of the other teams in the district to pull that off. Obviously, Terrell's already played them both, and the only other teams with winning records are Denison and Crandall to try to pull off that upset. So right now, Denison, Princeton, Crandall, and Greenville are all 1-1, and Terrell and Poteet are 0-2. So I think we'll have a much better a picture of things after this week, not just because of Denison and Terrell playing each other, but Greenville and Crandall play each other this week too. So again, that's going to be another swing game. Last year, Crandall won that game. But they've lost a lot, and Greenville looked, I thought they looked very, very athletic and big play ability in the game that Denison won in the district opener. So that's going to be a huge swing game as well. So we'll know a lot more after this week, and see things really starting to take shape in the district. But right now, I think you can say you have 4 teams. Or 5 teams that are fighting for the final 2 spots, but that may get cleared up a little bit after the games on Friday night. So we'll see where Denison stands after they host Terrell at Munson in 7-5A Division II action. Next up is Van Alstyne, and in District 5-4A Division II. They are one of the teams that also played last week, and that was a game that I did on Friday night, and it was a 49-13 win over Sanger. So Van Alstyne is sitting at 3-2 and 2-0, and they go to Aubrey, and Aubrey is 2-4, but they are 2-0 in district play. Last week Aubrey won 55-7 against Gainesville. Van Alstyne got there to 2-0 with a big second quarter. Sanger led 7-0 after the first quarter, and then Van Alstyne scores 5 times in the second quarter. Really dominated after Sanger went and scored on their opening drive. There was a flubbed kickoff. Van Alstyne was trying to pull off an onside squib type situation. It didn't work. Sanger had a short field as a result, and they went right in and scored. And then Van Alstyne went and attempted a field goal and missed, and that was basically the whole first quarter. And then after that initial possession by Sanger, it was 6 3-and-outs and 3 plays before the half ended. And that was what Sanger did in the first half. They basically did next to nothing. While Van Alstyne spread the ball around, scored all its points in the second and third quarters to go up 49-7, and then Sanger scored really late for its second touchdown. But like I said, spread the ball around to a lot of guys. Brady Carson 7 carries for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. Luke Juarez 9 carries for 65 yards and 2 touchdowns. Weston Johnson was 15 of 26 passing, 247 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Also ran 8 times for 52 yards. Braden Miller had 5 catches for 104 yards and a touchdown. Castor Fonseca 3 catches for 71 yards. Michael Upchurch had a touchdown catch. Rhett Smith had a touchdown run, and just a really dominating performance in the first half, especially, and then essentially through the game. Sanger kind of was able to do some stuff late with backups in for Van Alstyne. Everybody got a chance to play. Van Alstyne finished with over 500 yards offense, and that was, we talked about with Van Alstyne. They have the 2 games to start district, Crum and Sanger. 2 games that they won last year. This is a team that was the district runner-up, and if you're going to follow your path like you did last year, you got to win those 2 games because the Aubrey game is looming, and here we are with them going on the road to play the Chaparrals, and the winner of that game is going to have sole possession of first place. Everybody else through 2 weeks of district play, everybody else has a loss, and so right away we have an early game that's going to decide a lot, because the winner of this is going to have the inside track to the district title, and we'll be alone in first place. Aubrey is not the Aubrey of last year. We've talked about that they had a lot of graduation, at a lot of positions, but and they were 0-4 coming into district. Because they had a tough non-district schedule based on last year's possibilities and projections and wanting to get that group ready for a good playoff run. And there were some struggles this year, but obviously they've been in district, and they are the team. Coach Miller said after the game, everybody knows Aubrey's the team to beat in this district, and until somebody does, they're the top dog. And they opened district play with a 49-9 win against Bridgeport. And like we said, they won last week 55-7 against a Gainesville team that a lot of people thought at worst is a playoff team, but might be the best team in this district, that may have been able to give Aubrey some competition for that top spot, and they were not. So it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously Aubrey knows just as well as Van Alstyne, this is a huge game. If you want to win the district title, you probably have to win this game. And also when you look at some of the other games in this district, Gainesville and Farmersville are going to play each other this week. So one of them is going to have a second loss, and Crum and Sanger play each other in their rivalry game. Sanger's sitting at 0-2. Crum is at 0-1. So one of them is going to either get so either Sanger's going to drop to 0-3 or Crum's going to drop to 0-2. So you're going to have half the district, or at least the bottom 3 teams in the district are going to have 2 losses after 3 weeks of play. And so Van Alstyne, just early projections, you're in a good spot to make the playoffs. You've already beaten the bottom 2 teams right now. All you have to do is win one more, and you probably clinch at least a playoff spot. But like I said, this is a big chance for Van Alstyne to go make a statement. Aubrey's won 5 of the last 6 meetings. The Panthers are underdogs. Like we said, until somebody knocks off Aubrey, they're the team. And I think I don't say unfortunately. I think Van Alstyne might be the last team left that can give Aubrey that loss, because I don't know. Farmersville came into district undefeated and they lost last week to Bridgeport, who, like we said, Aubrey beat by 40. So if you're Farmersville, if you can't beat Bridgeport, I don't know if you can beat Aubrey. So outside of that, I think this is a huge game in this district to really shake up the standings. Otherwise, if you're Van Alstyne, you're probably in the same boat as last year. Be sitting at 2-1 after the first 3 games. Take care of business against everybody else. Get the second seed. Finish as high as you can and kind of go from there. But that's a huge game in that district as Van Alstyne goes to Aubrey for a 5-4A Division II contest with first place, sole possession of first place on the line. And if Van Alstyne's able to pull it off, they'll be 3-0 in district for the first time since 2018. Moving down to the 3A level, we've got a couple of teams that played last week, and we'll start in 4-3A Division 1, where the Whitesboro Bearcats are going to go on the road to face Peaster. And Whitesboro is 3-3 overall and 2-0 in district play after they won last week 36-21 against Boyd. And Peaster is 1-4 and 0-1 in district play. After they opened district, they had the bye the first week, and they lost to Brock 61-0. So to recap Whitesboro's game last week, we talked about the good start potentially for Whitesboro. They had 3 games against teams that they probably needed to beat if you want to be in the playoff race. They get up 22-7 at halftime. And they're able to score a couple times in the fourth quarter to turn a 22-14 game, 22-14 game into a 36-14 game. Boyd tacked on a late touchdown to get it to 15 points, but it was essentially a 3-score game there in the fourth quarter. Max Parker, 16 carries, 132 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Clay Hermes, 23 of 29 passing for 229 yards. Ran for 2 touchdowns as part of 10 carries for 34 yards. And that accounted for all of the touchdowns. Victor Chavez kicked a 35-yard field goal. And Boyd had to go to the air in this one to try to get things moving because on the ground they only had 67 carries for 22 yards. And of course when you have to throw because you can't when you have to pass because you can't run, teams can key on that, and Whitesboro came up with a pair of interceptions. Receiving wise, Brett Donaldson 5 catches for 97 yards, Carter Sluter 6 catches for 59 yards, Braden Bomar 4 catches for 36 yards for Whitesboro, and this is one of those games where you don't clinch a playoff spot because there's still too many games to play. But if you beat Peaster, you basically clinch a playoff spot. and then you can start worrying about seeding and how high you can go. If you look at the district standings, Whitesboro, Paradise, and Brock are all 2-0. Peaster and Ponder are 1-0, or excuse me, are 0-1, and Pilot Point and Boyd are 0-2. You've beaten the bottom two teams. You beat Pilot Point to Open District. You beat Boyd last week. If you beat Peaster this week, they'll have 2 losses, and you'll have 3 wins. And even if you were to lose the last 3 and be 3-3 in district, you're probably going to have the tiebreaker over one of those bottom 3. But you can't officially clinch. So keep on keeping your pace, atop the standings. Like we said, this is a Peaster team that has given up a ton of points. In all 4 of the losses, the opponent scored at least 43 points. They've struggled to score. Obviously, Brock put it on them pretty good last week. But you look at some of their other scores, and they're not really close either. And so you've got a chance to get to 3-0. Like we said, you've got Brock next week, and then you've got your bye, and then you play Paradise and Ponder to finish. And the way things are looking right now, that Ponder game at the end is probably going to be for seeding of some sort. But you got to take care of business this week. Like I said, you've got to win the games that I think you're expected to win. I think this is a game, even though it's on the road. Whitesboro's won all the meetings against Peaster, the 3 previous ones, and they haven't been close. So they're in a good spot. We talked about last week. You win the first 3, and you're in a really good spot just to make the playoffs. And Whitesboro's in that spot. Maybe they're starting to figure things out on both sides of the ball. We talked about, obviously, defensively they've had to tighten things up. They've been able to do that. It's another chance, and then we'll see what you got when Brock comes to town next week. But again, it's a really good spot for Whitesboro. You just need to keep your focus on that and get to 3-0 in district, and then you're in a really good spot over the final month. Considering you have a bye and all the other teams. Like I said, in this district, we've played 2 weeks, and in a 7-team district, 4 teams don't have wins. So a lot of teams are piling up losses, and they're going to fall out of the mix. If it's not after this week, it's going to be the week after that. So Whitesboro's in a good spot as they travel to Peaster for 4-3A Division I action on Friday night. We'll move over to 5-3A Division I, and that's where we find the Pottsboro Cardinals. They played last week, and they improved to 5-0 and 1-0 in District 5-3A Division I with a 55-40 victory against Mineola. And they are hosting Bonham. This is also a 7 o'clock start on Friday night. Bonham is 1-5 and 0-2 after the Warriors lost 59-22 against Mount Vernon. So last week, 55-40, and this was definitely an interesting game, from the standpoint of we didn't know what Mineola was, which is what we talked about last week. They had beat Mount Vernon, and what did that mean? And then in this game, Pottsboro gets up 41-14 at halftime, and things are looking pretty good, and then suddenly it's 48-40, with about 9 minutes to go in the game, and Pottsboro has to hang on. Major McBride, a major factor once again, with 21 carries for 331 yards and 4 touchdowns, the last one with 4 minutes to go, to provide the 2 touchdown or 15-point cushion, the 2-score cushion for Pottsboro to hang on. But this was a ground game. For the most part. Mineola rushed for almost 400 yards. Their main guy was at quarterback, Braden Alley. He had 33 carries for 220 yards. And and he had 5 touchdowns. So it ended up being a bit of a shootout. But again, Pottsboro finding a way. Kyle Trulock got the start at quarterback for this week as well. 13 of 14 passing, 208 yards, and 4 touchdown passes. Cameron Saunders, 7 catches for 89 yards and a touchdown. Brady Fulton, 3 catches for 53 yards and 2 touchdowns. Xavier Brady, 2 catches for 47 yards and a touchdown. And Pottsboro was able to win a game that looked over at halftime, looked in doubt early in the fourth quarter, but they found a way to win. And that's sort of been the case with them. You know, they had a close game with Van Alstyne to start. They had a game with Whitesboro that was a little shootout-ish. And then obviously this game, turned into a close one late. And they're going to host Bonham, who won their opener against SNS, but hasn't won since. So they're on a 5-game losing streak. And this district is starting to take a little shape as well. Winsboro and Pottsboro are the only undefeated teams. Mineola, Commerce, and Mount Vernon are all 1-1. And Rains is at 0-1. Bonham sitting at 0-2. Bonham gives up a lot of points. So obviously that's something to watch when we talk about them being on this losing streak. They gave up 45 points. They gave up 49 points. They gave up 56 points. And then last week, they gave up 55 points to Commerce to Open District, and then last week 59 points against Mount Vernon. So that's a ton of points allowed, and obviously you've got an offense in Pottsboro that has obviously Major McBride's been a huge reason for the success. We're at the midway point, and he's basically got a season's worth of stats. Anybody would love to have 1,270 yards and 22 touchdowns in a full season, and he's done that on 134 carries in half of a season. So if you want to say he's on pace for a monster season, he's already got a pretty monster season, especially from a touchdown standpoint. But they've been able to ride him in a lot of these games. The fact that Kyle Trulock looked that good in his second game of action, that's obviously a really good sign. Obviously I think the first game, you never know what it's going to look like. You get to get the nerves out of the way. You got to get some things nailed down. And it was a little shaky. And this was almost when you only have one incompletion. And you're averaging, almost 17, 18 yards a completion. That's a really good performance. And obviously it's got everybody in the district saying, oh, okay, well maybe they're not just gonna rely on the running game, which they ran for 420 yards obviously because McBride had 330. But they also they finished with 628 yards. And if you're going to be that efficient in the passing game and spread it around to 3 or 4 guys to make some plays, you can't just key on the run, and that's going to and obviously that opens holes in running lanes because people are so worried about what you can do passing. So that's obviously a good sign. The only thing, and I don't think it'll matter, but you do have to worry about it's homecoming for Pottsboro. It's the game before the big swing game in this district, because you're going to have a trip to Winsboro is on tap next week. So maybe you look at this as sort of a trap game. But I think Pottsboro should be able to be undefeated going into that matchup. The interesting thing from the Winsboro standpoint, they play Mount Vernon next week. So there could be a little something there. And maybe Mount Vernon can pull that upset. I don't know. But odds are you're going to have Pottsboro going to Winsboro next week for first place on the line. sole possession there, and then we start talking about seeding and all that sort of stuff after that. But before you can get to that, you got to take care of business against a team that's given up a lot of points, that hasn't won since the first week of the season, and you beat last year 55-14, and you've beaten this team 8 of the last 9 times you've played them. So 7 o'clock on Friday, District 5 3A, Division 1. Pottsboro is going to host Bonham on Friday night. So from here to the end we've just got previews for the 3As and the 2As, and then we'll talk about Texoma Christian, who has a bye this week. So as we jump down to the Division 2 level, in 2A, we have S&S goes on the road to Callisburg as they kick off 6-3A Division 2 play. S&S is 0-5. Callisburg is 3-2. We've talked about with this district, it's a smaller district. It's only got the 6 teams. So if you beat 2 teams, if you get 2 wins in district, you're probably going to make the playoffs. It's a mixed bag right now because you've got Holiday at 4-1, Callisburg, City View are 3-2, Henrietta is 2-2, Valley View is 1-4, and S&S is 0-5. Like we mentioned, it's gonna take some work for the Rams to get in the mix. We said that last year. They did not win a district game, so obviously they're gonna try to make an improvement there. They've got Valley View next week, so obviously if you get a win there, you'd be in the mix. Callisburg's 3-2, but their losses are to Pottsboro in overtime and losing to Bells before the break. And so obviously if they had played a little lighter schedule, they could easily be 5-0. So like I said, if you're S&S, you got to find a way to win, 2 games. Right now is that Valley View and Henrietta. Can you pull an upset on some people? Offense is still obviously the issue with S&S. They ended non-district, losing 28-3 against Howe. The defense is better. It's probably, I guess we would say it's a lot better. But the problem is they've been losing games. They lost that game to Whitewright 7-6. They lost to 28-3 to Howe. They lost to Bonham in a game. They gave up 33 points, but they only lost by 8. So they've had some games where they've been there. They've had some games where the defense has done well. The only question is, can the offense put some stuff together? And if they can, maybe they can be in the mix for that final playoff spot. But obviously, Holiday's always one of the best teams in the region. Callisburg's back to being a playoff contender under Coach Eddie Gill. And so the question is, can you do something against some of those other people in that district? So the first step in that direction is going to Callisburg for S&S in 6-3A Division 2 action on Friday night. The big game that everybody's going to care about, that everybody's got their eyes on, not just in the area, but probably across the state, just to see where things are standing, is in District 8 3A Division 2, and that is the Gunner Tigers hosting the Bells Panthers. Gunner sitting at 5-0, ranked number 1 in the 3A Division 2 rankings. Bells comes in at 4-0. They are number 8 in this week's rankings. So you have 1 versus 8. You have a game that last year was decided by 10 points. And you have all sorts of streaks and things and all that stuff. Obviously, Gunners won 20 games in a row, dating back to the loss in the 2021 championship game. They have won 15 straight games against Bells. The last time Bells won a game against Gunner was in 1989. Gunner has won 45 straight district games, dating back to 2015. Bells has won 20 of their last 23 district games, and all 3 of the losses are to Gunner. So, again, everybody kind of knows this is, right off the bat, we're going to see who's going to be in control of the district. The last couple of years, it's been Gunner. And that usually means Bells is essentially a lock for number 2 because Bells has never lost to anybody else in a district when they've been with Gunner. They've always taken care of business against the teams below them. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you could probably sit here for 20 minutes and talk about this matchup. You could also say nothing about this matchup because everybody knows what you're getting. You've got 2 of the best teams in the region. Obviously, Gunner is one of the best teams in the state in this run that they're on. They've both played some. Bell's played a really good schedule. Gunner played the people that would play them, and none of their games have been close. Obviously, the closest game was the Brock game a couple weeks ago. That was 35-12. Outside of that, they've blown the doors off of everybody. Bells has had some closer games. Relatively speaking, their closest win is 11 against Whitesboro. They beat Pilot Point very badly. They went into the bye against Callisburg, winning that one 49-22. So they haven't really been, quote unquote pushed. The Whitesboro game was probably the closest one that they were pushed, and that was a late push at that. They kind of had control of that game, but it's going to be fascinating. I think a lot of people looked at Bells and said, well, they're losing. The last Baker's going to be gone, and they're losing this guy, and then this guy. No, what are we going to do on defense because all these guys are gone, and we're making a change at quarterback, and it's going to be whoever wins that job is going to be a sophomore, and the assembly line just keeps spitting it out, and the slot T just keeps rolling along, and it looks the same as it has since Coach West has got there. They're 4-0, and I think before the season, if you looked at Gunner's schedule, you said there's 2 games on the schedule that I want to see what they look like. One of them was the Brock one, and we saw that. And then the question is, what does the Bells game look like? Because after that, there's nobody in this district that's probably going to challenge Gunner, and there's a chance that outside of Brock and Bells, Gunner's probably not going to be challenged maybe until the region final, the eventual state semifinal rematch against Canadian that everybody assume is going to happen again. So I'm interested, of course, to see what's going to happen. We've talked about, obviously, Gunner coming out of that Brock game. Gunner was going to have some injuries. How are they going to deal with that? Did the bye help a couple of guys in that regard that were banged up and you didn't need them to beat Gladewater the week after you beat Brock. So maybe some guys got a couple extra weeks of rest. And it obviously is going to be interesting to see with Bells, how they respond with a lot of these new guys. It's been going well, but Gunner's a whole new ball of wax. And I think I don't think you can discount the people that were around the program that saw that game last year only be 24-14. I think Bells knows they can play with Gunner. I don't know if they can I don't know if they can beat them, and I don't know if they can do it for 4 quarters. But I think they're the second best team on Gunner's schedule. And it's always just intriguing to see what could happen. And last year, it came pretty close to happening. And obviously, I don't think Bells goes in going, how are we supposed to beat these guys? I think they can legit go in there saying, we know we can play with these guys. And we'll just see what happens. But everyone's going to be watching from across the state just because I think once we get past this one, everybody kind of assumes Gunner's just going to be 10-0 and roll into the playoffs like they normally do. But if they don't, and Bells gets the upper hand, that obviously changes playoff brackets and who goes on what side, and that could really throw a monkey wrench into what a lot of people think about how things could go in the region. So obviously a huge game for both sides. Should be a lot of fun with Bells at Gunner for the 8-3A Division II opener on Friday night. The other game in 8-3A Division 2 doesn't have as much hype, but it is just as important in the grand scheme of things because this was a key game in deciding playoffs and seeding and tiebreakers and all that other stuff. And that's how going to Leonard. Both teams come in at 3-2 off the bye. And this was part of the three-way tie for third place between Howell, Leonard, and Blue Ridge. Somebody was going to get left out. It ended up being Leonard. So if you're the Tigers, you know coming in, hey, if we want to make sure that we're in the playoffs, win this game and change an outcome from last year so that we finish ahead of either Howe or Blue Ridge based on the results from last year. We've talked about how the way they're playing, the way they've bounced back from some early injuries and key guys that they thought they were going to have not be available. They've kind of changed things up a little bit. They're grinding games out. It's what they did against S&S going into the non-district play. I think the bye helps them a little bit to try to work on some things and not have to be like, oh my God, we've got to get ready for this next opponent as we're trying to figure things out. I think they can focus a little more on what they want to run, maybe throw in some wrinkles that they can work on for 2 weeks and not have to shortchange some things because you got to get ready for the upcoming Friday night. This was not a close game last year, but Leonard had brought back a lot of kids. They're throwing the ball around a lot. They're putting up big numbers. They're coming off a 39-20 win over Tom Bean. I think they've scored at least 35 points in every game. I think that's the number I saw. And they started 0-2, and they've won the last 3. So they're on a roll, and obviously they're thinking. I think both sides know this is a huge game. I know everybody's going to be looking at Gunnar Bells for what that is, and that's obviously a huge game. But this is one of those games. Like I said, when we get to the end and we look back last year, it was like, oh, that was the difference between somebody getting sole possession of third and somebody getting left out of the playoffs or whatever. So that we won't know for a month afterwards. But again, this is the two matchups in this district that have the local teams in it. It's huge. I mean, obviously the other game is Blue Ridge at Lone Oak. That's kind of interesting to me too, just because the Lone Oak has been better. But I still think Blue Ridge is, obviously probably the favorite, expected to win that game. But if Lone Oak wins that one, now we're talking everybody's sort of in the race for the last 2 playoff spots behind Gunnar and Bells. Last year it was kind of like, Lone Oak is off at the bottom. They're not really a threat to anybody. It's going to be 3 teams for 2 spots. But if Lone Oak wins that game on Friday, that means everything's in play for the bottom 4 in the district. And again, it could come down to the very last game, and we're talking about who needs who to win, and every outcome affects somebody else because of tiebreakers and all the other stuff. So 2 huge games. I think all 3 games are kind of interesting to kick off 8-3A. And this one has Howe going to Leonard on Friday night. Moving down to the 2As. Some fun and interesting matchups right off the bat in 6-2A Division 1. They open district play. And we have an all-local matchup in that one as we have Tom Bean going to Tioga. Both teams are 3-2. And this is interesting for a variety of reasons. One, when you look at the standings in this district, Nakona's sitting at 4-0, Alfred's sitting at 3-1, and then Tom Bean, Trenton, and Tioga are all 3-2, and Whitewright's 2-3. So we thought it was very competitive last year. It's looking like that's going to be the case this year. Obviously, when everybody except for one team has a winning record, and the team that doesn't have a winning record is right behind, is 1 game back with a couple of wins itself. That looks like that's going to be a competitive district. In this particular matchup, I'm interested in on the Tom Bean side. Here's a team that only won 2 games last year, so they're ahead of schedule. They didn't win any district games last year. And as we've talked about with them, unfortunately, for a couple of times, they're not eligible for the playoffs. So they are in full spoiler mode. They're better than they were last year when they didn't win any district games. Are they going to pick somebody off? Are they going to pick multiple teams off? Are they going to find their way to be the number 4, be fourth in the standings, and force somebody to be moved up into the playoffs because Tom Bean was just better than at the bottom half of the district? I think that might be the case this year. Obviously, last year that wasn't. They went over. We didn't have to worry about those scenarios. I think there's a good chance that Tom Bean's going to knock somebody off that's going to keep them out of the playoffs, or they may be elevated into the playoffs because of Tom Bean taking up a spot that it can't fulfill. But they're definitely playing better. And again, I hate to say it every week, but it has been find a way to make this season as good as possible and put the threat of whatever realignment does, whatever district you end up in, that those people look at Tom Bean and go, oh, they won X number of games, and they bring back, 80% of the kids or however many kids they're going to bring back, which is going to be a ton. They're going to be eligible for the playoffs now. They're a problem. I think that's what Tom Bean's looking at trying to do over the last five games. And Tioga's interesting this week because they haven't played in like a month. They played on September 15th, and then they were supposed to play the next week against Detroit to close out non-district play. And Detroit forfeited on Monday of that week. So Tioga tried to find an opponent for that week, couldn't find somebody. Then going into last week, which was the regularly scheduled bye for everybody in this district, tried to find a replacement, tried to find somebody to play last week just so they could play somebody and be able to, just get back into a rhythm. Couldn't find anybody. So basically, Tioga's going to have 3 weeks off going into this game. And I have no idea what that means. Are they going to be rusty? Are they going to be sluggish at the start? Is it going to take them a while to get going? Because they literally have not played for 3 weeks. And it sucks that that's the situation they got put in. And things just didn't work out for them in a variety of ways because they couldn't find an opponent and they had a team cancel on them. So I don't know what that's going to look like. They were getting better. They were playing better. They were, fitting into the, new scheme and new systems and everything about being under a new coaching staff. And they were starting to put it together. And then you just basically are just done for, 3 weeks. So I have no idea what that's going to look like with Tioga as their hosted Tom Bean to open 6-2A Division I play. So that's a fascinating game to me as well. And then the other game in this district that has a local team is White Red going to Nakona. Nakona's 4-0. White Red is 2-3. To me, this is interesting for a couple reasons. One, Nakona came in with a good record last year, and they were one of those teams like White Red that dropped down, and we didn't really know what how good were they? Were they better because they dropped down, and now they're going from 3A to 2A, and that's why their record is what it is. Or how does that factor into things? And they ended up going 3-2 in this district. So I'm interested to see what this means. And in this district again last year, a lot of stuff came down to the very last game. Tioga won the district at 5-0. But then Nakona and Alvord were both 3-2, and then White Red and Trenton were both 2-3, and everybody was basically still alive going into the last week of the season, based off of that. Now this game last year was close. Nakona won 25-18, and so I don't know for sure how much Nakona lost off of last year's team. Obviously, White Red's in a new situation with a new head coach. and new offense and all that sort of stuff. So it's going to be interesting. I'm interested to see the outcome in this one, just because of all that stuff. And again, White ended up making the playoffs last year after losing this game. They beat Tom Bean and Trenton to get in as the fourth seed. They were able to win the tiebreaker over Trenton. So basically, if you follow that path again, you win those two games, you'd probably be in. And then can you beat somebody else? They had some close games. Remember the last game of the season, they played Tioga, took them to overtime, and they could have been in a 3-way tie for second place, based off of that result. So I think it's going to be another competitive district, and I think it's even more competitive because I think Tom Bean is better, to where those scores are not going to be as lopsided. So I am interested to see the two results in 6-2A, including that right at Nakona game on Friday night. And the last game we have on the schedule for this week in Week 7, Collinsville comes back off their bye. They had the weirdly timed bye of joining everybody else in the area, even though every week somebody in this district has a bye. It just so happened that Collinsville's was the same week as a majority of the Grayson County schools. And they are 4-1, 1-0, and they are playing Celeste, who is 5-1 and 2-0 after they beat Lindsay last week 34-27. And this is also a 7:00 game at Celeste in 8-2A Division 2. So if you're heading out there, that's a 7:00 game. So standings after 2 weeks in this district, Celeste and Munster both 2-0. Collinsville's 1-0. Obviously, they had the bye, so they're a game behind in that race. Ayers 1-1. Santo is 0-1. Lindsay and Chico are 0-2. If you want to play the score game, the opponent score game, Celeste beat Lindsay by a 34-27 margin, and Collinsville beat Celeste by a 63-21 margin. So there's that. But last year this was a game that was close. Collinsville had to pull this one out 39-35, and their meetings have been close. 3 of the last 4 games between these two teams have been decided by 6 points or less. So even though Collinsville's won the last 3, it's been close, and obviously based on the standings, somebody here is going to get their first loss, and Munster. I'm going to see who Munster is playing. Munster has the bye, so Munster's not going to have a loss no matter what. So somebody is going to be sitting with 0 losses along with Munster in the standings. This is an interesting game for this reason. So you're Collinsville, you bring everybody back. Offense is high flying, doing its thing like it has been, since the start of last year. Collinsville's averaging almost 45 points a game, and that's with one of those being one quarter where they scored 28 points in a bad weather scenario. So they're averaging 45 points a game. Celeste is only, and we've talked about Celeste a couple times because they've played some local teams. Celeste is only giving up 10.7 points per game, and that's after giving up 27 last week. So you have a team that has been really good on defense against a team that's been really good on offense, and both teams know this is a key game and that they've played each other close the last couple years. So really interesting to see. And like I said, Celeste is in a good position to where if they win this game, then you're talking about when they face Munster, that would be for sole possession of first place, and vice versa. If you're Collinsville, you're just trying to, you went undefeated last year, and I think kind of like when we talked about with Aubrey, I think everybody's looking at Collinsville and saying, you are the team to beat. If we beat you, then we're the top dog. But until somebody does that, everybody's going to assume Collinsville is, Collinsville has it until they don't. But this is going to be a key. This is going to be a key game in that regard because you've got two undefeateds facing each other. and Connsville is coming off a bye, so you don't know how that's gonna affect anything because of that. And then, like I said, we don't see Lindsey Munster for a couple of weeks, and we don't see Collinsville Munster until the week after that. So it might be a little while before we shake things out. But like I said, if Collinsville gets the upper hand here, obviously they stay in the driver's seat until somebody can knock them off. But that's Collinsville at Celeste in 8-2A Division II action on Friday night. And we will talk about Texoma Christian because they have a bye this week, but they did play last week. So we will do a very quick recap of that because that was their district opener against Prestonwood North. And that's in TAPS Division III District 2. And that was a 69-6 loss in that game. So Texoma Christian is now 3-3 on the season and 0-1 in district play. Prestonwood North is 5-1 and 1-0 in district play. Nate Reed was 9 of 15 passing for 91 yards with a touchdown and an interception. Cade Adley had the touchdown catch. Jake Squires 7 carries for 22 yards and a 22-yard catch. Chris Barnett 3 catches for 27 yards. But tough sledding for TCS, which we thought it might, just because we said last week in previewing this game that Prestonwood was a high-scoring team. Could TCS stay with them? So they're going to go on bye. When they come back to action, they will take on who is it that they have? Crowley Nazarene Christian on Friday the 13th. And again, in this district, we've seen Nazarene Christian beat Azle Christian, Prestonwood beat Texoma Christian, and Bethesda Christian had the bye. So nothing too earth-shattering in this district, but again, you only have 4 district games because it's such a small district. So again, stuff could come down to the wire in that district as well, just because of the size of the district and keeping people alive until the end. So that is a look at the Week 7 schedule. Again, thanks for tuning in. Enjoy your game. Hopefully it's going to be cooler weather. Excited for that. And I hope you'll be back next week for another edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast.